Hello, everybody. Welcome to part 2 of the TOEFL What to Expect in the Exam, How to Prepare Your Students section, the listening. Okay, so first of all, the listening, I'd say, is probably the section that is the most underestimated with difficulty in the TOEFL exam and actually in English exams generally. The students don't realize how difficult the listening is because they listen to conversations daily, they watch movies, they listen to podcasts, which are obviously very, very important in training them for the listening. All of those are very important, but they often don't realize how difficult the listening section is in the exam. And it's an area that can pull their marks down incredibly because of the difficulty and because, once again, it's integrated into the other sections. So improving their listening skills is very important. And everybody's not good with auditory. It is one skill. Some people are far stronger on the visual than the auditory. So keep working on the listening. And often they will say to you, I don't really need to practice the listening as much. I rather want to practice the other skills. Encourage them to do some listening with you so you can teach them some of these listening skills. Okay, so first of all, the listening section will take about 45 minutes. There's quite a lot to it. 3 to 4 lectures, 2 to 3 conversations, 6 questions in each. So it's quite a lot of listening to do in those 45 minutes. The accents are mixed. So in the TOEFL, you will often get the American accent, but there are also some other accents, British, Australian, New Zealand, and others. And sometimes the accents also throw the students off. So encourage them also to listen to material with different accents, because that can confuse them. Generally, though, if the lectures, the conversations, the speaking is fairly slow and clear, but give them exposure to different accents. Now, the most important skill in this listening to teach them actually is note taking. Teach them to take notes, especially for the lecture. The conversations are a little bit easier, but note taking is still very important, and I'm going to show a couple of examples in a minute. But to be able to take notes quickly, carefully, and there are a few little tips and tricks which you can teach them. I'm going to show you now from the course. Okay, so note-taking skills, abbreviations, writing step-by-step notes are very, very important. For example, if they need the word addition, teach them just to write a plus sign. Little abbreviations like that can make a huge difference. When they listen, they must also try and observe the different types of conversations. Think about whether it's comparing, contrasting, definition, process, classification, theory and support. Listen for the advantages, disadvantages, the cause and effect. Obviously, understanding idioms and understanding synonyms those sort of expressions, those are all very important. So as you work on vocabulary, that will also make a very, very big difference in understanding the conversations, understanding the lectures, especially the lectures that are at an academic level. And as I said last week with the reading, this is an academic test. The level is very high. I'm going to play you a short section of a lecture in a minute, and you can hear the vocabulary and what is expected. Okay. We'll come back to the reflection in a minute. Another very important aspect of the listening is that the students will listen to the conversation or listen to the lecture first, and then only see the questions. That is also very different to IELTS and Cambridge. They don't see the questions while they listen to it. And that also makes it very much more difficult. In some of the practice tests, obviously for space, when you get to links like this, there will be some questions underneath the conversations, but in the exam, they listen to the conversation and then answer the questions, and they don't know what the questions are going to be when they're listening, and they can't go back to the question. So if they're not sure, they have to complete it before they go on. They can't change their minds and go back afterwards. That's a very important difference between IELTS, Cambridge, and TOEFL. That's another reason why note-taking is so important, because they've got to be able to get all the important facts down before they start the questions. Okay, because they can't go back. Now, the conversations are mostly related to work, study, those sort of general topics. So not difficult conversations. So I'm just going to play just a couple of minutes. Well, this is only 2 minutes long, but I'm going to play you a little piece of this conversation so you can hear the difference between a conversation and a lecture. Okay, so I'm going to press play. See if you can take notes.
Hello, is this the accommodation office?
Yes, how can I help you?
Well, I've got a bit of a problem. I'm staying at the Godfrey White dorm, and on Monday the warden came and told me that I have to move out this Thursday.
Really? How long have you been staying at the Godfrey White dorm?
For the last 10 weeks.
Oh, have you been doing one of the summer courses here then?
Yes, I've been doing the academic language course since the beginning of July.
And didn't you realize that your accommodation was temporary?
No, I thought I would be able to stay there for the whole year. I didn't read the small print on the document. The warden went through it with me, and now I see my mistake.
Oh dear, so you're looking for somewhere to stay then?
Yes.
Well, I'm afraid all the places in the dorms are full. I mean, there may be some students who don't show up when term starts, but we won't know that for the next couple of weeks. The best thing you can do is look for a private house. You'll have to share with 3 or 4 other students. Meals aren't included in the price, of course, as they are in the university dorms, and you'll have to contribute to the electricity bills.
Where can I find out about these houses?
I've got a list here, but it's not up to date. Rooms are taken up every day, so it's hard to know whether a house has a free place or not. I can give you a photocopy of this list, and you can ring round.
Can I use the phone here?
I'm afraid not. If we let everyone who asks do that, there'd be someone here all day.
Do you have a map? It'd be useful to know where these places are.
Yes, I can give you a map. This one's got the bus route.
Okay, we're not going to listen to that whole conversation, but now you come to the questions. Multiple choice. Okay, some of them obviously, as we said last week, easier than others. So even when you see when is this conversation taking place. Now, the importance of taking notes Because to remember now when the conversation's taking place, if the student hasn't taken notes of those details, is very difficult. Whose mistake was it that led to the problem? And normally in this type of question, these types of questions, you will get two questions that are very, very similar, and then two that are quite different. So two will be very close in how correct they are. And then you sort of debate which one. But you can see the details. Which of the following two things does the accommodation officer provide to the students? And then they've got to choose. So it's all multiple choice, but with small details. And that is where it's very difficult. Match the information to the type of accommodation, university dormitories, and then to remember which one it is. YMCA, the details of that. Okay, so I'm going through this quite quickly, but I also want to show the lecture, because the lecture now is much more difficult. Okay, I'm going to open this test. And this is an academic topic. Okay, once again, I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I want to play some of the lecture, listen to the topic. It's not a regular, it's quite a difficult topic, and then I will show you the questions at the end. Okay.
Listen to part of a lecture in an anthropology class.
So we've been discussing 16th century Native American life, and today we're going to focus on the Iroquois and Huron peoples. They lived in the northeastern Great Lakes region of North America. Now, back then, their lives depended on the natural resources of the forest, especially the birch tree. The birch tree can grow in many different types of soils and is prevalent in that area. Now, can anyone here describe a birch tree?
They're tall and white. The bark, I mean.
Yes, the birch tree has white bark. And this tough, protective outer layer of the tree, this white bark, is waterproof. And this waterproof quality of the bark, it made it useful for making things like cooking containers, a variety of utensils. And if you peel birch bark in the winter, we call it the winter bark, another layer, a tougher inner layer of the tree, adheres to the bark, producing a stronger material. So the winter bark was used for larger utensils and containers.
I know people make utensils out of wood, but utensils out of tree bark?
Well, birch bark is pliable and very easy to bend. The Native Americans would cut the bark and fold it into any shape they needed, then secure it with cords until it dried. They could fold the bark into many shapes.
So if they cooked in bowls made of birch bark, wouldn't that make the food taste funny?
Oh, that's one of the great things about birch bark. The taste of the birch tree doesn't get transferred to the food, so it was perfect for cooking containers. But the most important use of the bark, by far, was the canoe. Since the northeast region of North America it's interconnected by many streams and waterways, water transportation by vessels like a canoe was most essential. The paths through the woods were often overgrown, so water travel was much faster. And here's what the Native Americans did. They would peel large sheets of bark from the tree to form lightweight yet sturdy canoes. The bark was stretched over frames made from tree branches, stitched together, and sealed with resin. You know, that sticky liquid that comes out of the tree? and when it dries, it's watertight. One great thing about these birch bark canoes was they could carry a large amount of cargo. For example, a canoe weighing about 50 pounds could carry up to 9 people and 250 pounds of cargo.
Wow.
These birch branch
Okay,
snowshoes,
I'm just going
which,
to the end.
if you've ever tried walking in snowshoes, you know isn't easy.
Okay, now they get to the questions after that lecture. They have got just 3 minutes to answer these questions. What is the lecture mainly about? And then they go through, you can see it's choosing the different choices here. Okay, the value of birch trees to Native American groups, and then next, according to the professor, what characteristics of birch bark made it useful to Native Americans? Choose 2 answers. Okay, so repels water, and let's try those 2. And you can see how it's the different questions, but it's in a very limited time to go through these up to 7 questions per section, and remembering all those facts from what they've just heard in the lecture. So that's where the pressure comes in. Let's see if we go, this one has allowed us to go on to the next one, but listen again to the part of the lecture, then answer the following questions. Some of them ask different sort of discussion questions. Okay, and listen. Sorry, this one's not.
Why does the student say this?
I know people make utensils out of wood, but utensils out of tree bark?
Okay, so understanding that sentence. So in isolation, what that sentence actually means, and selecting. Okay, so before we finish off, I want to just go back to the actual lesson here. So a few little things to remember here. Now, I know I've gone through the listening very quickly, but some useful tips to remember. The questions are in sequence of the discussion. So I don't know if you noticed from the beginning of the lecture to the end, and even in the conversation, the questions are in sequence, which makes it a little bit easier. So when the students write the notes, it's important that they structured notes. What they hear at the beginning to what they hear at the end, it'll be easier to find when they've got to answer those multiple choice questions. They won't be able to skip questions or go back to previous questions, and almost always multiple choice. But as you saw there, it can be one sentence in isolation. It can be structured in different ways. Okay, the structure, as I mentioned earlier, is quite complicated. 3 to 4 sample lectures, 2 to 3 conversations, 5 to 7 recordings. So that's quite long. The conversations are easier than the lectures because of the complexity of the lectures and the academic nature. So the conversations imitate something like school, work, those sort of everyday questions. And then the lectures, art, life science, physical science, social science. So the academic subjects. Okay, and then the importance of the note-taking, the fact that they only see the questions at the end of the lecture or the end of the conversation, not during, which is very difficult. And then the note-taking, sufficient notes quickly, using abbreviations, listening for keywords, It's very important they listen for those keywords, the main idea, and what kind of lecture or conversation it is, and then being organized with the notes and then the responses to the discussion. Because you don't really know what the question, you don't know what the question's going to be. So they might say, why did the student go to the library? Was it to find out about opening times, borrow a book, find out about research? So you've got to remember the reason for the conversation. Okay, so as I said just now, note-taking is the most important skill in this section. Obviously, auditory skills are very important, and keep building on those auditory skills for the students. There are very good podcasts out there, audiobooks. There's a lot of material these days. Encourage them to listen to a lot of material to help. And if they can, obviously if they're on the train or whatever, then they can't make notes, but to practice that note taking while they're listening. And then allow them to develop their own techniques. As I said with the reading, they will develop their ways of doing it, things they find help them. That's absolutely fine, but guide them in how to improve their listening skills the best way they can. Okay, and then obviously vocabulary and understanding idioms is very important, and it's complicated vocabulary, as you could hear in the lecture. And even in the conversation, it wasn't a very easy conversation to remember all the details. Okay, lots of things here to help the student improve their listening skills. As I said earlier, listening is integrated in other sections as well, which we will get to in the next couple of weeks. So listening is very important, and it often pulls the students down. It can affect their mark greatly. So help them to improve their auditory skills. The most important thing is practice, note-taking, and improving those auditory skills. Music, movies, that kind of thing, that all helps. I've gone through the listening practice exercises very quickly, but I hope it's all clear. And I hope I've given you an overall idea of what is involved and the difficulty of it.